Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk and welcome to the final entry in the 12 Pseudoscientists of 2024, Pseudoscientist number 1. Today we have someone who actually responded to me, and I did watch the response video, but unfortunately it got taken down. Now it was not YouTube that took this video down, it was the person who made it himself, R.L. Now why would he take it down? Let's see what he says. I took down my latest video. I'm not wrong for calling out Simon Dan or Planet Walk at all. But things are toxic, and I don't want that. You know what? That is completely fair. If you feel like things are getting too toxic, it is a good idea to just step away and focus on yourself for a bit. It's also a good idea to look at why things get toxic as well, to avoid falling into that same trap in the future. I don't argue with YouTubers anymore. I argue with physicists and astrophysicists and win. These YouTube guys are still stuck in first gear, arguing about the shape of our planet. Mid-level intellects who want the smoke but can't actually keep up with what I'm doing. So instead, they want to make it a soap opera. And that gives me the ick. So the premise here seems to be that because I go ahead and debunk flat earthers, therefore I'm not smart enough or not qualified to go ahead and debunk anything else. And that makes me wonder if R.L. thinks my thought process for deciding what to talk about is, yes, I am going to talk about something that's intellectually challenging to me. Now, if that were my thought process, then I'm sorry R.L. but I would not have made a video on you. Your video was not intellectually challenging in the slightest. My actual thought process goes, what would be interesting or funny to talk about? I'll talk about that. I'm better than that, and I'm better than them. They are amateurs, and I am executive. I'm a 2-time Amazon #1 best-selling author. They've never even written a book. I really don't get this criticism. What? I've never written a book, so therefore I'm unqualified to take on the great R.L. It'd be like if I said that R.L. has never written software or made a game. Maybe he has, I don't know. But whether he has or not is entirely irrelevant to whether he's qualified to have this discussion. And who knows, maybe I will write a book. I've had some ideas for a while, but I do have some software that I have to finish writing first, which is a bit more important than that. I've been on the History Channel twice. They only watch TV. I am proudly a life member of Mensa. They can't even qualify. Oh, and they hate it. Just because you've been on TV, that doesn't make you better than anyone. I've seen flat earthers on TV. Does that make them better than anyone? No, of course not. As for being a part of Mensa, good on you. But just because you might be intelligent in some way, doesn't mean that you're intelligent in everything that you speak about. And also, quite often I see a lot of people who are talking absolute nonsense who claim to have a higher IQ, like Nigel Cheesyhands from the last video. Whether they're right or wrong about what they say their IQ is, it doesn't change the validity of their arguments. They argue with flat earthers, I argue with astrophysicists, and win. I've made discoveries and added to the body of science knowledge. They have contributed nothing. Okay, where is your peer-reviewed paper in a peer-reviewed journal? No, Graham Hancock's website is not a peer-reviewed journal. When it comes to science, whatever you discover means absolutely nothing unless you can have someone else validate it. And no, it can't just be some random person that gets to validate it, it has to be other people who are experts in the field. And look, I'm okay with not having added to the body of scientific knowledge. There are other people smarter than me that can do that a lot better than I can. These are garbage people trying to act like they're on my level, but haven't done anything to prove that. We are not the same. See you in a couple of weeks. Okay, R.L. you try to act like you're on some completely different level that I could never hope to achieve, but here's the thing, I listened to some of your book, and there are parts where you sound like a flat earther. Quite honestly, there were times when I was laughing, like, take a listen to this.
There is no such thing as gravity. There are only expressions of magnetism. There are things in our world that do not behave in a manner which supports the theory of gravity. But everywhere we look, we are surrounded by obvious examples of expressions of magnetism. If there is gravity, why are there clouds? We are witnessing magnetic levitation every single day without even realizing it. Observe how clouds, which can weigh thousands of pounds, float above our heads every single day and pass by without notice.
That is exactly the sort of thing that I'd expect a flat earther to say, to not realise that multiple forces can act on an object at the same time. And also, if R.L. Paul here thinks that saying that gravity is just magnetism is some kind of huge scientific breakthrough, then flat earthers need to get a Nobel Prize because they've been saying that for years. So R.L. Paul's post there started with him being humble and not wanting things to be toxic, which is good. But then it devolved into arrogance. Him thinking that he's better than me and Simon Dan because me and Simon Dan talk about flat earthers. Him not realizing that a lot of the times he himself sounds like a flat earther, making flat earth arguments. But here's the thing that makes it so much worse, because turns out he's a bit hypocritical, because after that post, he left this comment. Here, Planet Walk, since you're so smart, please be as apologist for this video as well, and let's see what you have to say about the issues I pin astrophysicists on. I know the subject better than anyone, and you can't out-argue me on anything face to face. My bet is silence from you. You are out of your league. An amateur propagandist and Science Channel glazer is no match for me. Hold on, I thought you didn't argue with YouTubers anymore. In fact, I remember you saying that, so what was that? If you felt like things were too toxic and you had to remove a video because of that, then why would you challenge me? If anything, I would argue that your constant need to view yourself as above others, as better than others, is what makes this toxic. At this point, it's not really the video that's the problem, though I must admit it did have some lovely graphics meant to disparage myself and Dan, so it did have that toxic element. The problem is that he has a massive ego and, well, it shows. Ahoy hoy, Planet Walk from the future here, and I've actually found out something since making this video. R.L. Paul used to watch my channel. I found this out because on my Counterspace word salad video, one of the top comments is from him. I'm cleaning my kitchen while I listen to this so I can make some Counterspace. But more importantly than that, I looked for other comments that he had left on my channel, and I found this one on a video I made about Ken Wheeler. I find your videos interesting, entertaining, and quite timely. I just did a video on the Einstein ring that I thought you might find interesting. I also made one on gravity, which challenges the standard model of understanding. By the way, it's in as simple of terms, possible for the sake of coherence, no word salad. I expect you to disagree, especially with my very last statement in the video on defining gravity, but I would appreciate your take and have a dialogue about where we see things differently, if you were so inclined to look at a different interpretation of science from a more science-based point of view. Love your stuff, and I consider you a role model of destroying pseudoscience and scientific disinformation. Cheers. What happened? That comment is very respectful. That should have been the tone the whole time. You see, if that had been his tone throughout this whole thing, then I would not have a problem with him. The problem that I have is that his tone is very egotistical and arrogant. Okay, to be fair, I'd have a problem with him being wrong, but I wouldn't have a problem with his attitude. Instead we get this, oh, I'm in Mensa, and I've written books, and that is why I'm better than Simon Dan and Planet Walk. And quite frankly, I do not care. I think less of you because of that. I have respect for the you of 3 years ago. I cannot say the same for the you of today. And the worst part is that comment was left on a video where I talk about Ken Wheeler. That's why there's a reference to word salad in there. So he knows that I don't just talk about flat earthers. Yet he wants to make it out like that's all I do. And even if it were all I do, he still found my videos interesting, entertaining, and quite timely, and said that he considers me a role model in destroying pseudoscience. Did his opinion on me change simply because I criticized him? Well, given that he expected me to disagree, I don't think so. I think that what has happened is his successes in the time since has just gotten to his head. I think if I had have criticized him at the time that he left that comment, then he wouldn't have gone down the route of, oh, I'm better than you and that's why you don't deserve any of my attention. Even though he continued to give me some attention and probably still will, if I'm being honest. So my message to R.L. Paul, who probably is watching, is be more like yourself from 3 years ago. You seemed like a much more pleasant and better person back then. Anyway, back to me in the past. I will see you at the end of the video. So I did watch the video, and I don't remember all of it, but there were a few things that I do remember. First off, he did have a clever little jab at Simon Dan, I think it was, saying that he face planted so hard that it grew roots. That's funny. But the more important bit was the accusation that myself and Dan didn't actually understand what he was saying. So he claimed that the current model of the solar system and his model of the solar system are very similar except for one difference. And that difference is that in his model, the equator of the sun is at a 23.5 degree tilt. Now this does fix the major problem that I had with his model in the original video, and that was that the seasons wouldn't work. Unfortunately for him though, he now can't use Polaris to explain why he has a different model, which is what his argument rested on. If I'm understanding his model correctly, then there should be no difference as to what Polaris does over the course of a year, so he can't use it. So, what is his evidence now for this model? He didn't say. All he said is, this is how things are, and left out the evidence part. Funnily enough, he could have actually been correct if he said that the sun had an axial tilt of 7 degrees, but he didn't say that. But then again, that would have made his model pretty much exactly the same as the current model of the solar system. Unless of course he hasn't communicated it correctly and now I'm misunderstanding him. But let's move on to the video that RL Paul challenged me to cover, which I am going to do because I have some interesting things to say about it. For context, this is a stream he did about Simon Dan because Simon Dan agreed to interview him about alien abductions but had to cancel a few times. One of those times was because he accidentally double booked, and the other times was because of medical issues. It's also part 2 of a 2-part stream, but he seems to have taken down part 1, so I can't show you that.
Let me finish the email. I said, in summation, you have lied about me, lied about science to do so. You have called my honesty into question when I am completely truthful about my abductions and experiences, attempted to paint me as delusional or crazy, then invited me to an interview, which I still accepted despite your appalling attempt to discredit me, and then canceled it 3 times without having the professionalism or common courtesy to reach out to me first to do so. No, sir. My patience with you is at an end. Now I'm going to expose this and you for the absolute shit show that it is, to the delight of my audience and at your expense. You are everything that is wrong with the world, all wrapped up in a beige hoodie, and your time is up, Peanut. Most sincerely and emphatically, your worst nightmare.
Once again, you're not an anime villain. You're not Simon Dan's worst nightmare, you're not my worst nightmare. What are you going to do? Make a video on me and then take it down again? And also, I do think it's valid to call your honesty into question, or at least your recollection of events. After all, in the video you made, you did repeat the lie that Simon Dan denies the existence of annual motion. If you wanted me to trust your memory a little bit better, then I would recommend bringing receipts, you know, actually playing clips from Simon Dan's video to back up what you're saying.
He wrote me back and said, "Hi, RL. I guess that means you don't want to do the interview anymore. I genuinely do. Again, apologies for not being able to do it at the moment, but I won't apologize for any medical issues I'm having."
And that seems perfectly reasonable. He wants to do the interview with you, and he's apologized to you for not being able to do that. He's just had some medical issues. Medical issues can just pop up out of nowhere, and sometimes they work in weird ways as well. I know that I've been hanging out with someone, and all of a sudden, I've had to go to the hospital.
So I wrote him back. "Hi, Dan. You're not a victim. Get over yourself. Apologize for medical issues? Of course not. You set the time at which you admitted you are not able to do it. That's on you. I would do the interview at any time and said so, and you know it. So that's a false excuse. Instead, try apologizing for the gaslighting video you made where you exposed your own ignorance trying to discredit me. Apologize for blowing me off for a flat earther after extending your public invitation."
Do I need to call RL Paul's memory into question again, because it seems like he's confused about who Simon Dan double booked with. The person who Simon Dan interviewed instead was Will Duffy. Now, very notably, Will Duffy is not a flat earther. Will Duffy is someone who's paying for both flat earthers and globe earthers to go to Antarctica to see if there's a 24-hour sun. Actually, by the time this video comes out, it will have already happened. So it does seem like RL Paul is pretty bad at recalling events, which does not bode well for his claims that he was abducted by aliens.
Apologize for not scheduling this at a time in which you can actually do it. Apologize for your abject unprofessionalism for not giving me fair notice of any issues.
You know, sometimes people think that they're going to be okay for something, but by the time they actually get to that thing, they realize that they are not okay for it. There are times when I've underestimated how easily I'm going to be able to recover from a flu or cold, and it turns out that I actually took a lot longer than expected. Sometimes you just got to accept that stuff like that happens. It's best not to get mad about it.
Oh, I'm still very much interested in the interview. You aren't going to frustrate me into refusing your invitation so you can use that to gaslight and say, I refuse to talk about the subject with you. No, Dan. You're not a victim, so tuck it in, sir. The game is still on. I'm just going to roast you.
And he wonders why things are so toxic. He thinks Simon Dan is trying to frustrate him, and rather than going, I am going to not get frustrated so I don't give Simon Dan what he wants, instead he goes, oh yeah, I'm just going to roast him. Learn maybe just a tiny bit of patience, and maybe that could help you.
I have bent over backwards to accommodate you, and you have had nothing but my time wasted. Don't try to play the pity card. Your condescension and arrogance do not go unchecked in my world. I have chosen my words and actions carefully. You should have done the same.
It's very odd that he would accuse someone else of arrogance and condescension, given all that we've seen from him today. And remember that this is in response to Simon Dan saying, sorry I had to cancel. Apologising isn't really all that arrogant. Sure, the I will not apologise for any medical issues, I can see why you might think that that's arrogant, but you gotta remember the way that you were talking to him before that.
And I'm tired of pretending that this guy isn't running, that he isn't spineless, that he isn't a coward, that he isn't a fucking snake, bro.
Well, it looks like he has Simon Dan there, because Simon Dan was running to prepare for a marathon. That's just what Dan does. That's why he has a channel called Run Man Dan. As for thinking that he's running from you specifically, I do not think that's the case. I think it's all really just a case of unfortunate timing.
See, he beats up on flat earthers and people who think there are two suns and all this bullshit. And he is a bottom feeder in the scientific community who wants to pick the lowest hanging, not even low hanging fruit. He picks the shit that falls on the ground.
Okay, let's say that R.L. Paul is correct in that assessment. What does that make you? If he only picks the fruit that falls on the ground, you must be something that fell on the ground.
He read my bio. I sent it to him, and I did that on purpose.
He says that like his bio was intimidating or something. I've read your bio. It's not at all intimidating in the slightest. It's funny.
Because I wanted him to see I'm not some flat earth idiot. I'm smarter than he is.
Buddy, I've listened to your book. It makes you sound like a flat earther.
Demonstrably so, through my accomplishments. That I'm a life member of Mensa, not a high school dropout.
You say you're a member of Mensa, yet I've heard you say some incredibly stupid stuff. It is almost like having high IQ doesn't mean that you are smart at everything.
Not only have I written books, but my books have become bestsellers. And they haven't just become bestsellers, but they're bestsellers in academic categories. And not only did my last book on UFOs become a bestseller, but it became a bestseller in 3 categories simultaneously: UFOs, cosmology, and astronomy, right? And my book on astronomy actually takes Neil deGrasse Tyson to task on some of the things he has said, and that book became #1 and kicked deGrasse Tyson out of his #1 spot.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, so let's start with him kicking Neil deGrasse Tyson out of the #1 spot, and I wonder, does he know how weighted algorithms work? The reason I ask is because if he did get the #1 spot, then the reason that he got it was most likely because he got a decent amount of sales within a short amount of time. As it currently stands, his book is at 241st place in astronomy on the Kindle store. Neil deGrasse Tyson currently has at least 4 books in that category that are doing better than his. And one of them, of course, is the bestseller in that category. Amazon likely gives higher rankings to books that were more recently published rather than books that were released a long time ago. This would be to prevent every #1 bestseller from just being really old books that keep getting more sales because they just happen to be #1 for a long time. But that being said, R.L. Paul did claim that his books were bestsellers in academic categories. And I hate to inform you, R.L. Paul, but Amazon is not a peer-reviewed journal. And I know that because I had a look at the top 100 books for both astronomy and cosmology. In cosmology, at 100th place for the Kindle store, we have a book by a flat earther about Flat Earth. That book outranks R.L. Pool's book in both cosmology and astronomy.
I've been on the History Channel, Coast to Coast AM. I've been in magazines all over the place.
Well, I've seen Flat Earthers on TV, so just because you've been on TV or radio, that doesn't mean you're some kind of genius.
So I call out both sides. I call out the bad science of people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Simon Dan and Michio Kaku. And guess what? Crickets. No reply. I silence astrophysicists. You think Simon Dan's gonna worry me?
Look, people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Michio Kaku have probably never heard of you. What makes you think that either of them are going to know when you've criticized them? At the end of the day, you're just another drop in a pond of noise. Your inflated sense of self-importance doesn't change that.
Especially after I already took him to school one time. He wants to be taken to school again, only this time he wants to call in sick to school.
I mean, I've seen you're taking him to school, and there was barely any substance to it whatsoever.
Anybody who listens to Simon Dan go on and on and on about the fucking earth is round, like that's where you are, man. You are stunted intellectually, and you deserve what you get.
You do realize that people usually watch Flat Earth debunkings for entertainment, right? Because Flat Earthers usually say some wild, wacky, out there things. Just like you do sometimes.
You know how many people he lied to and actually got to believe that annual motion was made up by me to fool them? Instead of just literally typing those two words into Google and educating themselves.
Except annual motion was never mentioned in either of Simon Dan's videos. I challenge you to find a clip of Simon Dan saying that you made up annual motion. You won't find it because it doesn't exist. This is something that I hear you bring up time and time again without any receipts. Just show it to me.
He's outright lying, misinforming and disinforming his audience, and they swallow it.
You do realize that is exactly what you're doing right now, right?
I'm going to say to you what I was going to say to him, because I have copious notes, my friend. He says, I'm 99.9% sure that this isn't a real phenomenon. Oh, well, that makes a lot of sense when you consider that you have ignored or not researched 99% of the evidence, and being an uneducated skeptic is to be an unjustified skeptic.
Okay, finally, some substance that we can actually talk about. So for many subjects, proponents of those subjects will say that there's a bunch of evidence out there. However, when you actually go ahead and look at that evidence turns out to be of very low quality. These subjects can range from Bigfoot to Flat Earth to anti-vax to young Earth creationism. For example, young Earth creationists will say, well, there's plenty of evidence against evolution, just look at the eye. How could that have evolved? But then you look into it and you realize that there are several different ways that you can end up with an eye. But at the end of the day, that's only one bit of evidence that they have. They have plenty more things that they can throw at you, but each bit tends to be as flimsy as the next. A lot of people will make their minds up on it despite having not looked at all the evidence, because the evidence that they have seen is the evidence that has been cited as the strongest, and it's just rubbish. And that is completely fine because nobody has the time to look at every single bit of evidence for every single subject. Like, for example, I have not looked at all the evidence for Flat Earth, and I'm not going to because I don't have the time for that. And to top things off, R.L. Pool is a bit of a hypocrite here because he certainly hasn't looked into most of the evidence of gravity and why it is not just magnetism, yet he asserts that gravity is just magnetism.
Being an unjustified skeptic is just as ridiculous and dangerous as being an unjustified believer.
It really depends. A lot of people don't have the time to look into everything, so it's fine in some cases to just trust the experts.
He says, I would love to see your evidence for this, but I am not sure that you have any. You know what I'm not sure of? I'm not sure that you can define what evidence is, since the entire scientific academic community can't define what evidence is on this topic.
Well, there's a few different ways that you could have evidence. For example, maybe you have videos. But ideally, that evidence would be of a certain quality. I have seen videos before of what appears to be a party balloon in the sky, and people claim that it's some kind of evidence of spacecraft. In fact, most things that I've seen that people try to attribute to aliens or spacecraft can be explained as, yeah, I can't quite tell what that is, but it's so low quality that it could be anything.
But be that as it may, I have tons of evidence. I have an entire chain of evidence because I am a professional investigator. and researcher. It's what I do for a living.
Well, I hope that your evidence would be good, but from the evidence that I've seen from people that claim that they've got evidence for aliens or spacecraft, I kind of doubt it.
I have a chain of evidence that shows you videos and photographs of these things in the sky. Then I show you the landing marks where they have come down on the ground. Then I show you the marks that have been left on me from being taken. And then I can tell you about my experiences, my interactions, and describe the beings I interacted with. There's an entire chain of evidence here that is unbroken.
So I really can't say much without having seen the evidence for myself, but there are potential explanations for each of those things. To start with, I do have reason to doubt R.L. Paul's recollection of events, and sometimes the human mind recalls incorrect information. I've certainly had times where I can't remember if something happened to me in a dream or happened in real life. As for having marks left on your body, that can happen surprisingly often. There's times when I've gotten a mark and I've wondered where it came from, and then later I remember, oh yeah, I burnt myself. In fact, recently I got a cut on one of my fingers, and I have no idea where it came from. That doesn't mean that it's suddenly aliens though. As for the videos and the pictures of the landing site, I would have to see that.
So don't talk to me of evidence until you can define what it actually is. And remember, whatever his definition is arbitrary. It's just made up and not established as scientifically valid by any academic. It's simply your opinion, and as such, not guaranteed to be valid philosophy.
But wouldn't the same be true for your standard of evidence? As for me, I take evidence to mean information that is supposed to support an idea. Now, whether that evidence is good or not is a completely different story.
I have experienced the trauma of ontological shock, and I have been communicated with in a very basic way by these beings, and these beings have told me themselves they are not human and what they're doing.
The question is, well, why you? Why is it always that the people that have the wackiest ideas about reality seem to always be the ones that get contacted by aliens? Now, one might say, well, they actually have wacky ideas about reality because they got contacted by aliens. They were told the truth. And my response to that is, well, why do they always seem to have different wacky ideas about reality then? But who knows, maybe one day I'll see R.L. Paul talking about raising your vibrations to reach 5D consciousness.
You know, he makes the supposition these stories only come about upon the advent of science fiction movies from the 50s. Are you fucking kidding me? Really? You think Plan 9 from outer space started the whole people are so gullible and impressionable and needy for attention that these people just start claiming these things because they saw it in a movie?
Well, it would make sense. People often have a tendency to claim that they've seen things that are culturally prominent. I've heard stories of people claiming that they've seen angels. And why do they say that? Well, because they're in a Christian community. Angels are more relevant to that kind of culture than aliens are, so of course they're going to see angels and not aliens.
It's just, wow, what a shallow interpretation of the human race, right?
Not really. Sometimes things just have a very simple explanation that some people don't like.
And he's only considering one side of a proposition when you say these reports only came out after science fiction movies became popular. It's not true. It could just as well be the movies were inspired by real experiences.
But isn't that also a shallow interpretation of the human race to say that, well, these things might have been inspired by real events rather than the product of people's imagination?
Betty and Barney Hill, not just stories. She drew a star map under hypnotic regression, which was only discovered much later to be an accurate representation of the Sirius star system. Please explain that.
Well, with that, you have to choose a very particular place around the star system to use as your vantage point. There are thousands of vantage points you can choose from. Of course, you're eventually going to get something that will turn out to be a match, even if it's just random dots.
He says that the Greys were not mentioned in the 1947 crash. That's not true. They were. The government also denied it was an alien craft after initially releasing the information that it most certainly was.
As far as I can tell, Dan does seem to be correct. The stories of bodies at Roswell came several years later, and they never said that it was an alien craft, they just said that it was some kind of flying disc. This is likely because of a misidentification due to it being part of a classified project. And look, we know that governments do all kinds of projects that we're not told about. A secret government project is far more likely than aliens, especially when we know that secret government projects do happen.
Now hold on. Are you telling me that the government may be lying to us? Come on.
Yes, governments do lie. Governments also keep secrets. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's aliens.
Dr. Shirley Wright, Einstein's assistant as an undergrad, gave one interview during her lifetime, just one. And she said that she accompanied Einstein to see the crashed Roswell saucer. She described the grays.
Okay, there's a few things that stick out to me as being a problem here. Firstly, that interview was said to have been recorded in 1993. Yet it wasn't released until nearly 30 years later. Secondly, the only information that I can find on Shirley Wright has to do with this interview. If I try to find out any information about assistants or undergraduates that Einstein had, her name does not come up once. I'm not saying that she was never an undergraduate of Einstein's, but if she was important enough to be invited to the Roswell crash and there was secret stuff there, you think should have been mentioned at least once. There is also the question of, is she alive, to be able to confirm whether she's the one in the recordings or not, because if she's not, then it could just be anyone in the recordings. Especially since if that's the only interview that she gave, are there any other recordings out there? Probably not. So how do we know that that's actually what she sounds like? R.L. Paul talked earlier about how the government lies. Do you want to know who else lies a lot? Conspiracy theorists. Conspiracy theorists constantly lie and make up stuff, and the reason is because they want to get attention. As it turns out, sensationalism, lying, is a lot better at getting attention than the truth.
And how can we prove that any of mine or other abduction victims' wounds are definitely from abductions? Wow, hold on. Forgive me, but it sounds like you're asking the victims of alien abductions to do your job for you, Dan, that we must both endure these experiences and also somehow become top-level scientists in an area in which yourself and the best scientists in the world don't know what to do.
Well, it's more that it's a really outlandish claim. Like, if I said that I was abducted by unicorns and I ended up with a hole through my hand, which I said was caused by a unicorn horn, you're going to be like, that seems really suspicious. How do we know that that is actually caused by a unicorn horn? If anything, you're going to probably think that I had a really heavy night of drinking and that I accidentally impaled my hand on something somehow. But that being said, I'm curious to know what these wounds look like, because we could identify traits with them to work out, okay, actually that looks more like it's from this.
But the way that we indirectly prove this is when people like me remember their abductions and can connect these with an ongoing pattern of events which repeat. Times when I remember my abduction experiences coincide with these specific and recurring marks. I will see them in the sky. There will be marks on the ground impressions and trace effects the next day. I will my experience that happened to me sometimes, and I will see the same recurring physical mark. It is a chain, an unbroken chain of evidence.
Well, there's certainly the question of how much of that is because you're expecting to see something, or how much of your memories are because you're expecting to remember something. Like, it is possible that you have a vivid dream and then you notice things that you wouldn't have otherwise noticed if you didn't have that vivid dream. It's also possible that you notice something, so you kind of gaslight yourself into thinking that something happened when nothing really did. There's also the possibility of making things up, but I would prefer to just see the evidence for myself.
This is all based on cognitive bias, and cognitive bias is a systematic thought process caused by the tendency of the human brain to simplify information processing through a filter of personal experience and preferences. In other words, people tend to believe what they want rather than what's true.
Yes, cognitive bias exists, and it exists for everyone. You're not immune to it. Essentially, what I described earlier was a form of cognitive bias where you only notice things because you expect to see them.
Then, if you were abducted by an extraterrestrial species, how would you go about proving it?
I'll be honest, I don't know. But I would also be skeptical of it. Like, if I was drinking or it just happened in a dream, then I'd have pretty good reason to dismiss it, I think.
Experiences are very difficult to prove of any kind, right? I mean, but that doesn't give anyone the right to deny them, dismiss them, or demand a burden of evidence, which is impossible to satisfy.
The only problem is that people can and do lie about their experiences. How do you sort someone's genuine experience from someone who's just lying to get attention? But not only that, how do you sort someone's genuine experience from someone who might be misremembering something? That's why there has to be a burden of evidence, because otherwise you just take everything everyone says that they've experienced at face value and you end up with something incomprehensible.
Have you ever ridden a roller coaster? Fucking prove it. I'm skeptical. Oh, you have a picture of yourself riding the roller coaster. Well, it's fake. It's CGI. It could be anything.
You know, most people who have taken photos of themselves riding roller coasters don't have grainy photos where it's impossible to distinguish what's going on.
people saw you. Your witnesses are unreliable and just backing you up because they know you.
I mean, hey, if you got other people that I can talk to that can corroborate your stories, then that might be a bit of evidence to support you.
Your description of the roller coaster is just like so many other people's description of a roller coaster, and you're just piggybacking on that and just copying them.
I mean, yeah, I could just describe a generic roller coaster because everyone knows what a roller coaster looks like.
I don't believe that you've ridden a roller coaster. Do you see how stupid that sounds when somebody says it back to you?
Well, if I did go on a roller coaster, I could say, hey, I went to this particular theme park on this day, and this particular theme park does have a roller coaster. I'd probably have multiple photos that would show me at that theme park, and I'd probably have something saying that I paid a fee to get in. But more importantly, it's not an outlandish claim. Many people have gone to theme parks. I'm not going to get some kind of special attention by having gone to a theme park and ridden a roller coaster. It's a very easy thing to believe. Getting abducted by aliens, on the other hand, is a claim that does require a lot more evidence because it's a lot more extraordinary.
They couldn't prove the existence of lightning by their own standard. I mean, go ahead, because lightning and UFOs are both uncatchable phenomenon. But they both exist because it's happening in the sky above us. We can't get a hold of it.
Well, for starters, we can describe how lightning works. We know the mechanics of it. Nobody knows the mechanics of a spacecraft.
But try proving the existence of lightning. Well, I've seen lightning. Okay, well, people have seen UAPs.
A lot more people have seen lightning. Multiple times. A lot of people, in fact, have seen the exact same lightning strike. Like, if you've got a thunderstorm that's happening, it is possible that upwards of 1,000, 10,000 people could see that and all say, yeah, I saw lightning yesterday. I've never heard of 10,000 people all coming forward on the same day saying that they've been abducted by aliens last night.
Well, we have pictures of lightning. Well, I have pictures of UAPs.
The difference is in the quality. When it comes to pictures of lightning, most of the time I can clearly identify them as lightning, whereas I can't really do the same for UFOs.
We have trace evidence of lightning strikes. Well, we have trace evidence of UFO landings.
Again, this is something where I'd need to see the evidence, because when it comes to lightning strikes, there is a clear, consistent way in which the traces are left. I'm not so sure what it is when it comes to UAPs.
Well, we have videos of lightning. We have videos of UAPs.
It's the same thing as photos. Lightning, we have clearly identifiable videos of lightning strikes. When it comes to videos of UFOs or UAPs, there's a reason why they call them UFOs.
Well, I've been struck by lightning. Well, I've been fucking abducted. How far down the road do we need to go here before you say, oh no, that evidence does track?
Well, for me, I'd like to see your evidence beyond just taking your word for it. Like, you've challenged me here to take a look at this live stream, and there is no evidence beyond you just saying that you have evidence. Maybe you have some somewhere, but it's not in the thing that you wanted me to take a look at.
I mean, Michio Kaku, someone far smarter than Blind Man Dan, has claimed to have studied some of these UAP videos frame by frame. And he said, with his own voice on public news, that these craft exhibit transmedium movement, which we cannot do, operate with no detectable thrust, which we cannot do, that these craft have no control surfaces, that they perform aerobatic movements that are not possible to be made by humans, and at speeds which create inertial forces not able to be endured by human pilots or by any material which we can currently create.
You know, when I hear something like that, my first thought is, well then maybe, is it possible that we're not dealing with something that is doing what you described? Is it possible that maybe some other explanation is being overlooked in favor of something that is more exciting? As a general rule of thumb, you should not let your excitement rule out the possibility of the mundane.
This is a physicist saying these things. Can you accept those assertions, or are you smarter than Michio Kaku as well?
Well, I've looked at other explanations, and something along the lines of infrared glare seems far more likely than a craft that we have no idea how it was built, we have no idea how it's managing to move like that, and it has no thrust, which, as far as we know, that shouldn't even be possible.
But the truth is scary. Better to keep our heads in the sand, better to mock us, better to, ask for unreasonable and impossible types and standards of evidence, to never establish a baseline, to keep moving the goalposts.
Well, when all the evidence seems to be of very low quality, I think it's okay to ask for maybe a higher standard of evidence. Like maybe invest in a better camera. But that being said, I have not seen RL Paul's evidence.
This is not a matter of truth or evidence, because I am not a liar or delusional, And my life and my accomplishments are a testament to that.
I'm sorry to break it to you, RL Paul, but liars and delusional people manage to accomplish stuff all the time. You have plenty of people out there that say that they're psychics or faith healers that manage to rake in a lot of money and get TV shows and appearances and all that kind of stuff. Being on TV or writing a popular book does not validate what you're saying. Again, I've listened to some of your book and it wasn't that great.
Delusional people don't accomplish what I accomplish. Aliens exist, they come here regularly, and they have abducted human beings. I am one of them. Believe what I am telling you because it is true, and one day this information will come in handy.
So, could you please provide some evidence? Like, seriously, that's all I ask for, is just a bit of evidence. I don't care how many times you say, oh, I've got evidence, I've experienced it myself. Just show me some of it, please.
Even people are like, oh yeah, there's things in the sky and we can't quite explain them, but they could be anything. No, they can't be anything because I know what's inside the craft because I've been inside the craft, that I have interacted with these beings, that they have physically interacted with me, that they have communicated with me, that they have told me things, shown me things, and I'm here to tell you all about that.
But in a lot of photos and videos, there are other things that they can plausibly be. Like, in a lot of cases, it looks like that could be a plane. In other cases, it might be a balloon or several balloons. There's a reason why they're often called UFOs. The U stands for unidentified. When something is unidentified, there's usually a lot of things that it could be.
Instead of mocking me, people should be thanking me, honestly.
Well, in that case, here is my challenge to you, RL Paul. You've challenged me, I think it's fair that I can challenge you. Show me your evidence. Don't just say that you've got evidence, show it to me. None of this, oh, please define evidence for me. Just show me your evidence and I'll go through and say, hey, this is good or bad evidence. Show it to me. Also, show me the bit where Simon Dan says that you made up annual motion. That's another challenge. And also, I don't care whether you're in Mensa, I don't care how well your books are done, I don't care whether you've been on TV, I care about none of that. All I care about is whether you have evidence. But anyway, that will be it for this video. Leave a like and subscribe if you like this video. Leave a comment letting me know what you thought of this year's 12 Pseudoscientists. Hold on, I just realized. RL Paul might take him getting number 1 in this year's 12 Pseudoscientists and label that as another one of his achievements. Don't do that. It's not a good thing if you've ended up on this list. You've ended up on the same list as Nigel Cheesy Hands and Flatzoid. But for everyone else, rather than getting you to thank me, I will thank you for watching. I will see you right now and in the next video, but right now to end out this video because I'm finally finished with last year's 12 Pseudoscientists. I do apologize that it took so long. There are a few things that came up that were a little bit unexpected, but I am finally done now, and I do hope that I can start doing more frequent content again. At least, I'm going to try. But I do appreciate everybody watching me and who gives me support, so I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for sticking around.